Foxgloves are one of our most recognisable flowers, and over the centuries people have been drawn to them because of their beauty. And as well as them growing wild in woodland, they pop up in waste ground, and you often see them in cottage gardens. But behind the story of their beauty, there's so much interesting folklore and science. And I'm going to tell you a bit about that today, while also showing you how I'm sketching with it and printing from it as part of my artist's year. If you're curious about how the artwork you'll see in this video were made in detail and the materials I used, I'll be sharing a studio session soon, and it will follow the journey from foxglove to finished artwork. Foxgloves have accumulated an amazing amount of folklore throughout Britain and Ireland, and I'm sure in other countries as well. Before scientific analysis and education was available to ordinary people, they would create stories about plants and attribute magical properties to them. Even the name is mysterious. Many people assume it refers to a fox's glove, with the tubular flowers resembling the fingers of a glove, or a belief that the foxes would wear the flowers on their paws to move silently when raiding hen houses. Others have suggested it may derive from older names like Foxgloves, where folk meant the hidden people, the fairies. Its scientific name digitalis was coined in 1542 by a German botanist called Leonhard Fuchs, and is from the Latin word digitus, which means finger. In many parts of Britain, foxgloves were believed to belong to the fairy world, and there are stories that suggested that fairies wore the flowers as gloves, or that the bells could be used as fairy hats. They were also associated with superstitions, such as picking foxgloves might anger the fairies, or bringing them indoors could invite misfortune. Conversely, planting them around your house, or weaving them into garlands, could ward off evil spirits. And in alchemy, where people were trying to convert ordinary materials into gold, foxgloves featured in concoctions that were meant to symbolise transformation and purification. Foxgloves also had associations with witchcraft. The plant's potency linked it closely to witches and their mysterious practices, and European folklore suggested the plants were vital to potion making and spells. The flower's poisonous properties symbolised the dual nature of magic, healing or harming, depending on what was intended. In medieval Europe, witch trials occasionally referenced foxglove and claimed that witches would use the plant when making potions when they wanted to induce hallucinations or control minds. For centuries, foxgloves were used in folk remedies when there was very little available medical advice. However, they soon realised that it had to be treated very carefully as it could be so potent. Every part of the plant contains cardiac glycosides, chemicals that affect the heart. In the late 18th century, the botanist and chemist William Withering investigated a traditional herbal remedy being used by a Shropshire wise woman, and he eventually identified foxglove as the active ingredient out of more than 20 constituents. His work led to the development of digitalis, later digoxin, one of the most significant medicines in medical history. For many years it has been used to treat heart failure, irregular heartbeat and dropsy, what we now call fluid retention. But the difference between a helpful dose and a dangerous dose is very small. And so foxgloves became a symbol of an old medical adage, sola dosis fecit venenum. The dose makes the poison. And incidentally, all parts of the foxglove plant are poisonous, so do be careful if you're handling them. Foxgloves are native to Britain and have long been loved by gardeners. They're particularly associated with cottage gardens, woodland gardens and romantic planting schemes. Because they self-seed freely, they often appear to choose their own place in a garden. They thrive on disturbed ground, woodland edges and clearings, and historically they've often colonised places where trees have been felled or the land disturbed in other ways. The plants do something called indeterminate flowering, which is when the plant continues to grow and produce new flowers at the tip of the stem or branch. This means the flower spike creates new flowers at its tip, even as older flowers lower down are blooming or already finished flowering. This indeterminate growth allows for a longer flowering period, and you can often find that foxgloves will flower for several months in the summer. Foxgloves are fantastic for pollinators. The species has evolved to be especially attractive to long-tongued bees, such as the common carder bee. The brightly coloured flowers and dark spotted lip attracts the bee, while the lower lip of the flower allows the insect to land before climbing up the tube. And that means that it will drop pollen from other foxgloves, and so the plant will be able to reproduce. The spotted patterns exist as a guide to the bees who can see in ultraviolet, and the dots are sort of like beacons to entice them to the flowers where they know they're going to get some nectar. And it's rare to look at a patch of foxgloves and not see some insect activity, and it's one of the sounds and sights of a British garden in summer. If you're watching this in America, you know that you have foxgloves there too, because they were introduced 200 or 300 years ago and have colonised lots of areas. But really interestingly, they have made adaptations and evolved over that time. And because there are hummingbirds in certain countries, the corolla tube, which is the area in the flower where the nectar is secreted, has actually grown by about 25% over the last 200 years, which means that the hummingbirds with their long, thin beaks can get right up and get the nectar out and also distribute the pollen to help the flower reproduce, which I think is really amazing. Foxglove seeds are tiny but highly prolific, with a single plant capable of producing over 1 million seeds under perfect conditions. They are classified as biennial, which means the seeds germinate and grow rosettes in their first year but don't flower until the second year. In my experience, they sometimes take 3 years to reach flowering. Here are some seedlings that I sowed a couple of weeks ago, and you can see how minute they are. If they don't get big enough before the winter, their growth can be held back. For instance, here are some I sowed last year, probably neglected during the dry summer, so have not flowered this year. At least not yet. Perhaps they will later on in the summer. But the good news is, if they don't flower this summer, I'm going to get a bumper crop next year. So my tip would be to either let plants freely self-seed, so you've got a continual cycle of them germinating and growing, or sow them really early in the spring to ensure you get flowers the next year. Oh, and an extra tip, if you have some self-sown plants and you want to know what colour you're going to get, I love all the colours, but some people I know don't like the pink ones and just want the white ones. Well, there's a trick. The seedlings that will produce purple or pink flowers generally show a sort of purplish or reddish flush on their leaf stems, whereas the white ones will have just pure pale green on their stems and their leaves. So look out for that. And because of the foxglove's beauty and all that's sort of mythological significance, they've featured a lot in art and literature, and poets and painters have often used them as sort of symbols of enchantment and transformation, and they've appeared in fairy tales, poems, and they often symbolise these sort of hidden worlds and secret knowledge. And I'm just going to finish with a poem by William Wordsworth. It's very short, don't worry. Maids at the wheel, the weaver at his loom, sit blithe and happy, bees that soar for bloom, high as the highest peak of Furness Fells, will murmur by the hour in foxglove bells. So do look out for the companion video to this with my studio sessions, where I show in more detail how I've made the artworks that you've seen in this video. I think that's why foxgloves continue to fascinate us, because there's so much interesting history to them, and also there's something so beautiful that can also be deadly, and I think that's always going to have a fascination for us. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and do look out for all the other videos in this series, which is an artist year in plants.